Hey, what's up? Welcome to the Spotfire tutorial brought to you by DataFuel. My name is Kyle Lamata, and today I'll show you how to perform calculations between columns in a cross table. In this example, we're interested in comparing the performance of two different completion types for oil and gas producing fields. Here we have this cross table with type 1 and type 2, but the problem is that we can't do any mathematical operations with the current configuration because any cell value added to this bottom axis will be split into the two completion types. To make this work in a cross table, we would need to have one column with the average 3-month IP for each completion type, and then take the difference between those two columns. In the previous video on this topic, I showed how to accomplish this with a pivot transformation. If you're not interested in going that route, the second example provides the same result as example 1, but without adding a second table or applying any transformations. We'll do this with some logic using two calculated columns. And the two columns that we'll insert will only show the 3-month IP for either completion type 1 or completion type 2. So instead of having one column that has 3-month IP data for both completion types, we're going to split them out into their own columns. This essentially returns the same result as pivoting the data, but without actually doing that transformation. To do this, click Insert, Calculated Column. Calculated columns are expressions written with columns from your data table and functions that are built into Spotfire. I'll use an if statement, which will evaluate whether a given row is associated with completion type 1 or 2. Check out the logical function group to learn more about if statements. This expression is going to be written as if, open parentheses, completion type equals completion type 1, then return the value from the 3-month IP column. And if that's not true, just return a null value. So notice how the if statement has three arguments. The first argument is the expression that we're evaluating. The second argument is going to be returned when that expression is true. And the third argument is going to be returned when that expression is false. The null values and the third argument are going to be ignored by the cross table. So make sure to use nulls instead of zeros, which could throw off any calculations. Finally, give this a name of 3-month IP-completion type 1 and click OK to insert it. After adding calculated columns, I like to look at the result to make sure it makes sense. When the completion type is 1, we can see in this table that the values in the new column are matching the values in the existing 3-month IP column. However, for completion type 2, these values are empty or null. Now I'll add this column to the cross table by selecting it from the value or bottom axis selector using average for the aggregation method. Next, I'll insert the second calculated column, and since the syntax is basically the same, I can just insert it using this recent expression feature and then change the completion type from a 1 to 2. Give this column a similar name, and then click OK to insert it. We can go back to the table and just verify that it's returning the values that we expect. For example, when completion type is equal to 1, we don't see any values. However, we do see those 3-month IP values when completion type equals 2. So I'll go back to the pivot table, add this second calculated column into our pivot table, and then finally we can just add a third column that takes the difference between completion type 1 and type 2. We could do this with a calculated column, or we can write a custom expression within the cross table as in the previous example. Select the type 1 column in aggregation method, and then subtract the type 2 column. Feel free to change the display names to make them a little more user-friendly. For example, we can call this one 3-month IP for type 1, and for the other column, we can call this 3-month IP for type 2. The last thing I'll do is make this chart more presentable by removing the legend, the axis selectors, and title bar. And that's it for the second example. In this video, I showed another way to perform mathematical operations within a cross table in Spotfire. When deciding between this option and the previous one from the last video, where we used a pivot transformation and added a second table, you'll have to ask yourself, do I prefer to add a new data table, or should I just add columns to my existing table? Each one has pros and cons based on your specific data and requirements. The pivoted table in example 1 is certainly faster when you're transforming many columns because you can just add them all at once, but then you might be faced with additional challenges of working with two data tables. So if you run into that challenge and you don't want to work with multiple data tables, it might provide you a little more flexibility to have all the data in one table by using the calculated column method shown in this video. Hopefully this second example has provided additional insight on how to tackle the problem of calculations within cross tables. The next video I publish will show a third option which is similar to the second example but provides much more flexibility. This third option will let you choose which columns to display and compare on the fly using property controls. Be sure to check back in a couple weeks to see that video. The best way to do that is by subscribing to my YouTube channel so that you're alerted when new videos are published. And don't forget to visit the blog post linked in the notes below to download the Spotfire template shown in this video. Thanks for watching and have a great day.